I would like to introduce myself. Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Wood, and I am very fortunate to be working as Innisfail's Dementia Friendly Community Coordinator. I am part of the Community Partners in Action group, and over this past year, we've been working very hard to make Innisfail a more dementia inclusive or a dementia friendly place to live. And one of the things that we've been doing is trying to increase education about what dementia is. And also, something that we're working very hard at is to better support care partners in our community. We've been very lucky to have experts from all over Alberta in dementia care join us every Wednesday afternoon in September to share their knowledge. And today we're very lucky to have Jonna Lowther with Caregivers Alberta. So welcome, Jonna. I'm just going to start by a few housekeeping items. This is our first Zoom presentation, so we ask you to be a little bit patient with us as we might have to work through some of the kinks. If you can please remember to keep your microphones on mute. And also this session will be recorded as there are some care partners who are working today and wanted to hear Jonna's presentation. So we will be recording this session for them to watch at a later date. So really, Caregivers Alberta grew from the ashes of caregivers burnout, and a group of caregivers banded together to support each other. And in 2001, Caregivers Association was formed, which is now Caregivers Alberta. And their mission is to really caregivers and promote their well-being. And their vision is an Alberta where caregivers are valued and supported. Caregivers Alberta is an organization that is made up of caregivers for caregivers, and they focus on the caregiver as an individual and helping to maintain their well-being rather than to teach them how to be caregivers. They also help to improve the lives of Albertans who are working as care partners by providing group and one-on-one supports that help care partners connect with other care partners. And they also help to increase community capacity to support care partners by educating professionals like us and promote networking and referrals to different organizations, and really advocate at a provincial level for policy change that will make a difference in the lives of care partners in Alberta. And in Innisfail specifically, Caregivers Alberta supports our community with the Compass program that is available for community members to participate in. And if you're interested in the Compass Care Partner program in Innisfail, I would encourage you to please phone Karen Bradbury, who is also a member of the Community Partners in Action group, at the town office to register. And I would like to invite everyone to give a warm welcome to Jonna as she shares her information with us this afternoon. So welcome, Jonna.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you. I know the Zoom world is a little different, isn't it? Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be a part of this. My work with Caregivers Alberta is very rewarding work because I feel like I'm doing something to contribute to a better quality of life for caregivers around the province and around the world, really. So I'm happy to be here, and I've only been with Caregivers Alberta about a year and a half. So my previous background, I'm from the United States. I lived there for my whole life, but my previous career prior to coming here was in long-term care and supported living environments and working with PT/OT services. I did something that is labeled as recreational therapy. And very early on in my career, I began to specialize in dementia care. So dementia is something that's very close to my heart, that I'm very passionate about, and that I have a lot of lived experience of being around that diagnosis. I have a family history of it as well. Unfortunately, we have a genetic predisposition for a high risk. We don't actually have that what they call the familial DPOE gene per se, but we do have a genetic predisposition for risk. It's the best way to describe that. So I'm always really motivated, also because of the time that I've spent with family living with Alzheimer's disease and dementia, and with what were clients, but then became my friends for many, many years, of people living with dementia. So it's something that I strive very hard to help reduce stigma around that diagnosis, and sort of change how society supports people living with that diagnosis. That's a little bit about me. What we're going to talk about today is the caregiving role and what that looks like. And much of what I'm going to discuss is applicable whether you're someone caring for someone with dementia or not. But what I love about trying to promote change in the world of dementia support is that it is really practical, common sense things that can make the biggest difference. So, and with that, I think I'll just start sharing my screen and we'll jump into the presentation if that sounds good to the rest of the team. Are we good? Give me a thumbs up, Jennifer, if that works. Excellent. Okay. So Caregivers Alberta is a province-based community service agency. We're a nonprofit organization, and we exist solely to support those of you who are caring for someone. Oh, my arrow button isn't working. Let's try that again. There we go. Okay. Who are caregivers? A caregiver, we classify that definition as anyone who's assisting a family member or friend with challenges that are resulting from disability, illness, or aging-related needs. So, of course, caregiving for someone living with a dementia diagnosis fits right into that definition of who you might be caring for, and that you are a caregiver. Caregivers are parents of children with disabilities. They are adult children of seniors. Sometimes they are spouses of someone with cancer, and sometimes it's just a friend or a neighbor that lives next door that begins to suddenly start assisting their neighbor due to the need for extra care and support. So we find that there are neighbors who are also caregivers. Caregivers are all ages. I think what's really interesting to note about this information is that the bulk of caregivers are between the ages of 30 to 64 years old. And that really demonstrates the challenge that caregiving is for many people, because that is usually primetime career years. And it's people who are raising families, and so they have all of these other things in their world and on their plate of responsibilities, while also caring for a spouse or a family member or a friend who needs extra care and support. So we know that it's a challenging role. We understand that it takes a lot of time for a lot of these caregivers. 67% of caregivers end up spending more than 9 hours a week in care. And you can look at those other statistics there. The 12% spend 10 to 19 hours a week, and another additional 12% spend more than 20 hours a week. So that 67%, the bulk of us, only doing over 9 hours a week, sounds better than 20 hours a week. But again, if you're working and you're doing all of this other stuff in the middle of your caregiving role, it's quite taxing. There are almost 1 million caregivers in Alberta alone. And what's also interesting is that there's almost as many men as women who are classified as caregivers. What we discover is that 93 to 95% of our clients are female. So that just tells us, though, when we look at the statistics, that when there are just as many men practically as women in this caregiving role, it is the men who are not reaching out and asking for help. So we understand that that's an area that we need to drive awareness and figure out some unique ways of how men can believe and become aware of their caregiving role. Part of the term caregiver is that we don't always self-identify as such, especially when it's a spousal role or a parent role and you're caring for a child, because it's like, well, they're family and that's just what we do. And that's absolutely true. However, you have an additional role and a different effect on that family relationship when you're also serving as a caregiver or support person to someone you love. Caregivers experience a lot of different challenges and impacts that come within this role. We experience mental health and wellness challenges. We have a higher risk of depression, anxiety, and stress. And I say we because I myself am also a caregiver. And so I completely understand what it feels like to be in this journey. I mentioned I had family members who lived with Alzheimer's disease. I was a secondary, not a primary, but secondary caregiver of family members living with that diagnosis. And then in 2010, that word caregiver hit me on a very, very personal note, and I found myself caregiving for a spouse, a husband, who had a very serious brain trauma accident. And so suddenly, here I am in the caregiving role 1 year after we're married, and it completely flipped our roles, it completely flipped our life, of course. So I know exactly what it's like to try and juggle, still trying to work, and finding a balance and a happy spot in life is a challenge, because it's hard when your relationship with your loved one is changing. So this mental health and wellness is actually one of the top negative impacts that happens for caregivers. Financial impact is also an additional thing that happens. We experience reduced wages due to lost work hours. There's usually a lot of out-of-pocket expenses that sometimes come with our care recipient's diagnosis or needs. We have a physical impact because for some of us as caregivers, we're actually lifting and moving and assisting in transportation of our care recipient. We have lost sleep, which affects our physical body. We experience a lot of stress-related illnesses or a compromised immune system. We hear from clients all the time, especially in the winter, that they come down with one cold and they say, I can't get rid of it. I'm just continually sick, cold after cold, illness after illness, because they're constantly running at such a high-paced speed and balancing so much that it is quite taxing on our physical body too and our immune system. We experience system challenges as a caregiver because we have difficulty finding necessary resources and supports. Sometimes the discovery of those additional resources and supports is only as good as the question you ask or the people you know, right? So it's quite, that has a quite large impact on us as well. But that is one of the reasons that Caregivers Alberta was created, in order to help caregivers discover additional resources and supports that they may not have been aware of. Caregivers experience a lot of loneliness and isolation, and that of course causes difficulty in relationships with colleagues, with other family members, within the care recipient relationship of the spouse we're caring for, or again the child or the parent or the friend. It changes the relationship in that piece, but it also changes the other relationships in our life. We deal with a lot of negative emotions such as guilt, anger, grief, sadness, doubt, and worry. There's a lot of apprehension about the future around our caregiving role usually. And so negative emotions is a normal part of life, and it's okay, of course, to feel all of that, to be angry and to feel grief and sadness. But we never want to stay in that spot. So again, that's another thing that caregivers are having to learn how to sort of shift and move through. Isolation can become a challenge because providing care for a loved one can be incredibly isolating experience. It leaves us again at a higher risk of depression, loneliness, and hopelessness because we don't see how things can change. There are a number of reasons why caregivers become isolated: a lack of time. There are also that personal and societal expectations. I know myself, I have very high expectations of myself as an employee, as a mother, as a spouse. And so that high expectation can creep in and cause issues where there doesn't need to be issues sometimes. There's also societal expectations in the sense of that some people do just think, oh, well, it's just your job to take care of your family member or your friend that you've chosen to support because you know, that was your choice and you did it, and now you're there and they need you. And so there's a lot of societal stigmas around this caregiving role too sometimes. And you'd be surprised to discover how many caregivers are actually experiencing long distance caregiving, or then have to physically pick up and move their life to be with the person they're caring for. So isolation becomes quite a large burden that we bear. And it causes caregiver burnout. Caregiver burnout is a result of having difficulty asking for help. I mentioned earlier, it seems that our men don't reach out for support. And so that's an area that we certainly want to drive more recognition around. But that difficulty asking for help is something that we all battle. Caregiver burnout is also a result from that high expectations piece I already mentioned. It's sometimes a strong and unrealistic dedication to making things ideal for the person you're caring for. We feel this large responsibility to, as a caregiver, you know, do everything we can to make life easier for our care recipient. And then we forget ourselves in the process of that sometimes. We have difficulty saying no. We often consistently sacrifice ourselves and our needs for the benefit of others, and feeling as though you are the only person capable of providing care. These are some of the signs of burnout, but I actually am just curious. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see some faces for a minute, because I like to try and engage with other people on. Do you find yourself discovering any of those signs of caregiver burnout, or what I just discussed around caregiver burnout? Does that resonate with you, and does it make sense? And can you all identify with that? A show of hands or a thumbs up or reaction in your little box would be helpful. Yeah. Yeah, I think we can all absolutely identify with that. Yeah.
And can I just jump in here too, Jonna?
Please do. Please.
When we started our initiative, we surveyed care partners in the community as part of our community survey. And what you had just mentioned is what we found in our survey results as well. That many of the people who identified as care partners also in our survey identified with feelings of loneliness and not being able to comfortably talk to their family. So what you're saying is true in our community as well.
Thank you, Jennifer, for that feedback. Yeah, it's a really common thing, and we sometimes experience, well, I shouldn't say sometimes, we do, and we know that we do, because we hear it from clients, and I experience it myself, this guilt piece around feeling like we should have made different decisions, or we should have done stuff differently, and all these should have things that come into our brain. And so it's a real mental health challenge being in this caregiver role. These are some very specific signs of burnout. And when we talk about burnout, I don't mean, I gave you the definition of burnout. It's more than just feeling stressed and anxious. It's really sort of where you feel like you hit the wall and you have nowhere to go. That helplessness and that hopelessness and that feeling of loneliness is really constant. And that is a sign of burnout. Lacking energy, frequently sick, being always exhausted. If you find you're neglecting your own personal health and wellness, if you can say you feel like your life feels dominated by caregiving, if you have difficulty relaxing when help is available, maybe you act impatient or irritable. And that, again, that feeling of being overwhelmed, helpless, or hopeless. I see some stuff going on in the chat box here. See some little pops chatting up. Check that. Oh, from you guys. Okay, good. It's nice to know. Sometimes when I'm doing presentations, participants will send messages in the chat box, commenting on what I was just saying, that it might be resonating and adding valuable pieces to the conversation. So I'd encourage you, those of you who are watching from work or home or wherever you are, please feel free to engage. We will have a Q&A after the session too, but please feel free to engage in this discussion too. There we go. So this importance of self-care. We hear this, how important it is to take care of ourselves. And I am guilty of it as well, as saying, well, I don't have time to take care of myself. But self-care is not about self-indulgence. It is about self self-preservation. I took a week off work last week and purposely focused on this self-care piece in my life, because we get so busy doing constantly, especially as caregivers, that we really don't focus on ourselves at all. And we give no energy and no time to ourselves. But if we cannot take the time and carve out little pieces for self-care, we cannot be there for the loved one that we're trying to support in the best way possible. So I think it's important to think about it like that when you say, I don't have time for self-care, or that just feels like another job. Self-care is not intended to be another job. It is literally about self-preservation. And I like to say it's about self-love. We cannot care for other people without caring for ourselves. We can't love other people without truly loving and supporting ourselves first, because it comes from us and into others. So that self-care piece is huge. So if you think about that for a moment, understand that self-care can be a variety of different things. It's not just a bubble bath, a warm bubble bath, right? For some people, self-care is centered around animals. Maybe it's looking at pictures of animals in National Geographic magazine, or watching animals on TV, or if they have a pet of their own, right? That pet therapy, that animal piece, is a form of self-care for many. Sometimes it is relaxing and sitting and staring at the ocean, like that lovely lady is in the hammock there. I myself find if I was sitting there, I would definitely love to claim that as a moment of self-care right now. So, and I should have said this earlier, but I apologize. I sound a little nasally. I'm dealing with some sinus congestion with the weather change here in Edmonton and Alberta. So for some people, self-care is simply focusing on their relationship with friends or family or others. It's focusing on relationships that are outside of the caregiver role. Maybe it's spending time with children, with babies, with grandchildren, and how healing and nurturing that can be for our soul. And another form of self-care that I like to mention is this grounding piece and connecting to nature, whether that's simply going for a walk every day, whether it's literally putting our hands on nature, on a tree or on the grass, or our feet on the grass to feel it. It's important that we remain grounded, and literally sometimes think about that in the literal term of grounding and rooting your feet into the earth to nurture your own soul and your own health. We have to learn how to build our support network quite creatively as caregivers. And so again, it's that asking out for help, but it's discovering who is in my immediate little circle that maybe I'm overlooking. I'll give a good example. I was doing a Compass course in August, and one of our participants on that course was expressing how she's caring for her grandfather, and the other family members weren't really chipping in and helping, and it was all her, and she was getting exhausted, and she didn't know what to do. Her grandfather's still living alone, so she has children and working, and so she's juggling and shuffling a lot. And she lives in a rural area where there aren't much supports. There's not a lot of home care or healthcare supports in that space, the region where she is. And so I said, you know what? Have you thought about a neighbor? Does your grandfather have a neighbor or a friend nearby that could, check on him a couple times a week? And she's like, you know what? I hadn't even thought of that, because I've just been so busy just thinking about everything that I have to do for him. So sometimes stopping and thinking for a minute, who are those other people in your immediate circle that might be able to sit with your loved one for a minute, or go for a walk with them, or help you fold laundry. Sometimes building our inner support network is also about understanding the diagnosis that our care recipient is dealing with better. So especially around the diagnosis of dementia and Alzheimer's disease, it's becoming a more widely discussed diagnosis, which is excellent, because that's helping reduce some of the negative stigma that surrounds it. But it's also, there's lots of research that's getting pumped out in this area around Alzheimer's disease and dementia, which is good. And the more we absorb some of that information ourselves, if we're caring for someone with that diagnosis, the easier it is to understand, and that greater understanding can help reduce our stress. learning to accept help. I don't know about you all, but there's plenty of times where I'm desperate for help and I don't see it staring me right in the face. So recognizing that sometimes help isn't going to do something the way you would do it, but that it is important to accept help. And for those of you who say, I have a really hard time asking for help and I can't do that and accepting it, I want you to stop and think about for a moment what it feels like when you get to help someone else. When a friend is hurting or grieving and you're able to give them a hug or you're able to cook them dinner, how does that make you feel? And realize that there are other people in the world and around you that also want to feel that way about supporting you. So learning to accept help, taking a break. I can't stress that one enough, even if it's like 2 minutes to just step away and take a break. And I encourage you getting outside, and exactly like that picture is showing, and reaching in and breathing internally that outdoor air, even if it's the middle of winter. I still recommend that a lot too. Sometimes your support network are the actual health practitioners or physicians or therapists that are a part of your routine with your care recipient. And sometimes it's just sharing the care, right? It's back to that concept of accepting help, but actually then releasing some of those tasks to someone else. So think about that. Not every change needs to be a big one around this idea of self-care. I gave you some examples of self-care that were really tangible, very realistic. That doesn't have to be a major life change. It could be simply making sure that you take 5 minutes a day to step into a quiet room by yourself and take a few deep breaths. So listen to your body. What is your body telling you? My body today is telling me that I'm tired, I'm run down with my sinus congestion. It's wearing me out. And so I've had to be a little more mindful about what I am expecting of myself this week. And taking that time that I need for my body to heal and do what I need to do for my own mental health and wellness. And it's about balance. It's about striking that balance in our lives, which we know is tricky, but it is possible. So. And what about dementia? I mentioned earlier that like so much of what we talk about is applicable regardless of whether you're caring for someone with dementia or not. When dementia enters the picture, you generally have an additional layer of challenges or impacts to your life that has. Excuse me, one moment while I take a drink.
While you take a drink, I'll read one of the comments that came up. Often people are scared to accept help because they think they have to reciprocate. We need to encourage that a person would not offer help unless they really mean it and don't expect something in return.
Absolutely. And I find that, and I understand and I get that worry, I absolutely do. But again, stop and think about how it's usually that expectation we're putting on ourselves to reciprocate, not that someone else is expecting that. So. I also shared one of the things I wanted to talk about around dementia caregiving specifically. I have a lot of resources on this topic because it's something that I've spent many years of my career doing and supporting, and also the personal history. And I was flipping through thinking, what do I really want to talk about with caregivers around dementia, and what do I feel would make the biggest difference? And so as I was flipping through a lot of my resources that I keep on hand, I came across this one called 10 Real Life Strategies for Dementia Caregiving. And it's out of the Family Caregiver Alliance, National Center on Caregiving. I included a PDF of the 2-page document, and I shared it with Jennifer and the team to also share with you as participants. So it's a really great handout. It's a front and back handout that you can keep on hand and or share with others. It's a wonderful learning tool to share with friends and family as well, to help them understand a little better what you might be experiencing. So we're gonna go into these 10 real life strategies and talk about it a little bit. I do want this to be an opportunity again to share your own responses. So if you're not comfortable coming off mute and interrupting, that's fine. There's some stuff in the chat box, like some of you have. That first thing, our first tip around dementia caregiving is that we have to be reasonable, or that being reasonable, rational, and logical will just get you in trouble. You're dealing with someone who's living with a brain illness and they can't help it. They didn't choose this diagnosis and they can't do anything about it. And so we think when our normal pattern throughout our lives are when we hit an obstacle in a relationship that we try and problem solve it and we try and discuss it and we try and figure it out. But that approach, although reasonable and rational, is not going to get you very far if you're dealing with someone who has a progressive brain illness. So I think that that's the number one thing that we have to keep in mind when we think about the tasks and the activities associated with being a dementia caregiver, that sometimes the responses we get they're not going to be rational or logical. And so when we try and force that in our environment, it causes further problems. Does that make sense to everybody? Our second strategy is that people with dementia do not need to be grounded in reality. This is one that is really hard for families and friends to wrap their head around in initial stages of dementia, because there are so many times when someone living with Alzheimer's disease or dementia seems perfectly lucid and can have conversations and has perfect control over activities that they're being self-involved in. And then the next moment, it's completely out the window. And that doesn't make sense to our rational brains. Well, here's what's interesting. It's not making sense to their brain either. Like, it's the same thing, right? But again, they can't control it and they can't help it. And this grounding in reality is not a good plan. So I think we talk about one in a moment around therapeutic lying and how it reduces stress, but essentially it ties into this piece around that it's not important to be grounded in reality. If our loved one does not remember that their parent has passed, or a child has passed, or doesn't remember that they're not getting up and going to work every day, us reminding them that no, you don't work anymore, you retired 15 years ago, or no, your mother died, last year, that it brings that fresh process of grieving again over and over and experiencing that loss. So I encourage you to not feel like you have to be forcing this piece about being grounded in reality. We have to be grounded in reality, and the reality is that our person and loved one living with dementia is not living in reality. Redirecting and asking someone a redirection technique that is used often around this is that if your loved one is asking to see someone who is no longer there, or is talking about something that is not current reality, they're obviously missing something about that subject. And so talk about it instead of negating it and saying, no, that's not the case. Just talk about it. Say, well, yeah, you must really miss working. You spent many years in that career, and I can imagine that that's hard. Like, what was one of your favorite moments about working? What was a favorite part of your job? So asking nice, fun, encouraging questions, or tell me about a favorite memory with your mother if they're not remembering that their mother is gone. So those are some real strategies and examples based in that. This third tip on this sheet says, you cannot be a perfect caregiver. Now we know that, but yet again, we seem to hold ourselves to this higher expectation and this higher standard. There's no way that you're going to do everything right. You're going to fail. You're going to be upset. You're going to be angry and make wrong decisions sometimes. That is a part of who we are as human beings. So understanding that this is a process and it's a journey, and giving yourself some grace to go through that. And please quit holding yourself up to that standard of perfection. The fourth tip is around therapeutic lying. So it's again, not forcing the reality of our current life onto someone whose brain does not have the capacity to absorb that. We tend to be meticulously honest with people. However, when someone has dementia, honesty can lead to distress for both of you, especially the one that you're caring for. How important is the argument, right? And I always express to family members or friends dealing with this diagnosis, I say, you will never win an argument with someone with dementia. I don't care how hard you try, you're not going to win, because their brain is not allowing them to see the truth. So this therapeutic lying piece is actually much more calming and soothing. And sometimes family members feel really guilty by not telling the truth. And I'll give two other clear examples. So working in a supported living environment for many years, we would have family members who would come in and have dinner with their loved one. And their loved one would say, oh, please stay, or please take me home with you. I just want to be with you. And the family member would attempt to have a rational conversation. Well, no, but you live here now. So, you don't live at my house, and you can't come home with me. Often, especially as their loved one would progress through the stages of dementia and really not be orientated to time and place, it was easier if that family member just, said, I love you, I've got to go run some errands and I'll be back. I'll be back isn't saying I'll be back in 1 hour, isn't saying I'll be back tonight. It is saying you'll be back and you're not lying. So that's one very clear example that I can share. And another one is kind of related to that, what we were just talking about, not grounding in reality. If your spouse is talking about a mother who's gone or a friend who is no longer living, talking about that person and honoring the memories of that person instead of saying, yeah, well, they died last year. So that therapeutic lying of saying, yeah, well, I don't know. I haven't seen them in a long time. I'm not sure what they're doing. What's so bad about that if it's helping that person living with dementia feel better in that moment? It's all about being present and in the moment when you live with a dementia diagnosis. It's grabbing onto whatever is real and present in that reality in that moment and claiming it for the happy memories and honoring of those memories that it can be. Is this resonating with you guys? Anybody want to comment or share anything before we keep sort of going through it? Again, I said it's really common sense stuff, but it's good to remind ourselves of it. So I see thumbs up. No comments in the chat box that we need to look at. Okay. The fifth real life strategy around dementia caregiving is that making agreements doesn't work. So you can make an agreement with someone with dementia. They're not going to remember that. And often, or they may remember it differently and attempt to hold you to something that you said that you never really said. So don't go there. Don't go there. Don't make the agreement, right? We have to take control of our future environments based on the decisions that we're making right now in the moments with our loved one with dementia. So don't put that expectation on something in the future because you have no guarantee that that's going to happen. So the example that this handout shares around this says, for example, getting a tea kettle with an automatic off switch is better than warning someone of the dangers of leaving the stove on. Again, someone living with dementia can't remember some of those things you might have already told them. So don't expect them to. The sixth strategy, doctors, physicians, health practitioners, families, friends, they all often need to be educated by you. You are the one who has seen these changes happen with your loved one. You are the one living with the very real life of it. And so make sure that you're talking about it with other people. The doctor doesn't always see what's going on in a home environment. Telling a doctor what you see at home is important. The doctor can't tell during an examination that your loved one has been up all night long pacing. So how would they know that if you don't tell them? And of course, if we've lost sleep, and if our loved one has lost sleep, their response to certain questions or stimuli may not be as good as it would have been if they had slept well. So again, educating those around us about what we're experiencing. And sometimes doctors too need to deal with therapeutic lying, telling the patient that an antidepressant is for memory rather than depression. Depression is one of the most commonly untreated symptoms for people who are aging and people living with dementia. Of course, imagine yourself if you were living with the diagnosis of dementia, a huge sense of loss that you must feel over not being able to remember people's names, of not always understanding what's going on around you. There's a huge sense of loss. And dementia is usually often a progressive diagnosis for most people. And so it starts somewhere, and as it gets worse, that person living with that diagnosis goes through loss after loss after loss after loss. I forgot to switch my slide as we were talking about this, sorry. And so depression is something that's really important that it is addressed with your family doctors and your physicians, not just around you, which could very well need to be treated as well, but around your loved one who's living with dementia. Our seventh strategy there is you can't do it all, and it's okay to accept help before you get desperate. I don't know how many of us seem to learn this lesson the hard way, and we don't ask for help until we hit the wall. Like, bam, flat in our face, right? I'm young, and I still just continually feel like I learn this lesson over and over again. You think I would have learned it enough by now. And I still don't. I still just crash and burn sometimes. Asking for help is hard, right? But it's okay to recognize that we can't do it all. When people offer to help, the answer should always be yes. Have a list of things people can do to help you. In our Compass course in particular, we have this list called You Asked For It. And it is encouraging caregivers to sit down and think about it. It's already a list of things, common tasks and actions that we have to do around the house, such as mow the lawn, rake the leaves, do the dishes, fold laundry, take our car in for oil changes, take out the garbage, like these things that are just a normal part of our life that we have to do. So there's a list in our Compass program called You Asked For It with those activities typed out and blanks for you to put the name of someone who might be able to do that task for you. So the next time you see them and they say, hey, how are you doing? You can say, I'm okay. You know what, but I could really use some help. Or often people say, hey, how are you doing? What can I do to help? We have to think about ahead of time, what are some of those things that they could do to help us? And this can help prepare us to accept help when we can and when it's there in front of us. Don't get desperate. The eighth strategy is it's easy to both overestimate and underestimate what your loved one can do. It's both. So don't berate yourself for making the wrong decision or making the wrong statement in return. It's easy to overestimate what our loved ones are capable of living with dementia because of the brain. When a brain is compromised, it tries very hard to route around the areas that are compromised. And our brains are extremely resilient. And so sometimes the brains are able to, fire neurons and speak around that dead spot in the brain to the neurons over here, and they work. Suddenly they work. But you never know when that's going to happen. And so, again, I think that piece about grace, giving yourself grace, giving your loved one living with dementia grace, and understanding that there will be a lot of fluctuation in capacity, and that it's normal. We have to normalize it. Sometimes it's a matter of underestimating and trying to do too much for our loved one with dementia. This is just as bad as overestimating, because someone with dementia who is often depressed and experiencing loss, they need to feel of value and still have a sense of purpose in their life. And so one of the things that I talk about a lot is about empowering someone living with dementia and really supporting them to be successful in completing tasks and doing tasks and activities independently. Sometimes that requires us as a caregiver to set things up for them. Maybe if we told, if I told my dad with dementia to go into the bathroom and, do his normal morning routine of washing his face, shaving his face, brushing his teeth, maybe he's progressed to his point of dementia where he's no longer able to do that on his own. But if I set up the tasks one at a time, maybe if I go in and I set the washcloth on the sink and I set the shaver and the shaving cream next to the washcloth, and I walk him in there and say, okay, now it's time. I've got the stuff gathered for you to shave, and I'm going to leave the room and let you do that. Seeing those objects, setting him up for the task, creates the opportunity for him to be successful in doing it on his own, which is hugely satisfying for someone living with dementia. Nobody wants to be taken care of like every tiny little thing. It gives us no sense of purpose or value for why we're even alive. So that underestimation piece is an area that we can work on too, and discovering ways that we can set up our person living with dementia to succeed in a task on their own. And maybe we can chat about more of that during our question and answer time, because I'm a big firm believer that this impacts daily quality of life for someone living with dementia and yourself, because you both feed each other in negative reactions or positive reactions and responses. That 9th strategy is don't ask. And I added to this, it's not in the handout, but similar is cue, don't command. So we'll talk about the tell, don't ask thing first. Asking, what would you like for dinner, may have been a normal part of the routine between you and your loved one. But now we are asking our loved one to come up with an answer when they might not have the words for what they want. They might be able to think about it. They might be able to answer that question in their head, but then can't get the words out of their mouth because the brain is losing that ability to connect properly all the time. Maybe they don't even recognize that they're hungry. Like that becomes a common issue too. So instead of saying, what do you want for dinner? Instead say, well, it's time to eat now. Come with me. Let's go eat. That encourages still the independence without requiring a whole lot out of them to answer a question in the moment. So tell, don't ask. And similar to that is cueing and not commanding. Instead of, if you're assisting your loved one in a morning routine of getting dressed, instead of saying, here's your pants, put them on. Instead, have the pants and just hold them, extend them. Don't command, but use your physical, use their senses, their ability to still see and hear certain things to the advantage of cueing them to respond and engage. So those are tips that can reduce the power struggle, right? Because so often there's a power struggle issue that comes into play with someone living with dementia and a loved one, because the person living with dementia does need some extra support. They do need some extra help in a lot of tasks. But we as a caregiver often take that authoritarian role without realizing it. And so then it becomes this power struggle issue and there's fighting and tension. So cueing for responses instead of commanding, and telling and don't ask is, simply, again, think of opportunities to not stress their brain out more when it's not necessary. The last strategy that this handout addresses, it says it's perfectly normal to question the diagnosis when someone has moments of lucidity. I talked about that early on in the presentation of saying that, it is hard for us to really have a realistic understanding of what capacity is when it changes and it fluctuates in the diagnosis. It's normal. This is a normal part of living with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease or dementia. So we have to normalize it and make it okay, and give yourself some grace. Again, I just keep saying that, but it's so true. Like, just give yourself a little space to digest and realize that a lot of what you're thinking and feeling is normal, and try to put yourself in the shoes of your loved one living with dementia and think about how you could feel more at peace and a higher sense of calm if that was you in that situation, and then respond appropriately. What's lovely about the Dementia Friendly Communities Initiative that this program is a part of, if if society and culture as a whole adopted just these 10 strategies towards approaching life with dementia, our communities would be far more supportive for both the person living with the diagnosis and their caregiver and their families. There's so much that we can do, tiny little things that we can implement change in our local circles, in our local networks, and in our little communities. And the biggest piece is just talking about it, just talking about the diagnosis and discussing the strategies that we've learned to implement if we're living with that diagnosis, whether it's us or a family member living with it. So it's a perfectly normal process, everything that we're going through and experiencing on this journey, and find the similarities with your peers. I want to talk for a minute about the supports that are available to you through Caregivers Alberta before we go to a Q&A session and give you time to respond to some of what I've shared and us talk about maybe some additional strategies for creating more dementia-friendly environments in our community. But Caregivers Alberta is here to support you listening, tuning in right now. We're here to help you on this journey. We have a caregiver advisor who works with caregivers one-on-one. Literally, you can pick up the phone and call this person. You can email this person. You can schedule a coffee, a Zoom date, whatever that looks like for you. But we actually have a person, a human being that is available to you for one-on-one support and consultation. And that's extremely valuable that I don't think a lot of people realize we offer. And it's a lifesaver for many caregivers because they don't know where else to turn to sometimes. So we offer a caregiver advisor as that one-on-one support. We do education sessions. Every month it varies depending on what our programmatic theme is of the month and who we've asked and invited to come speak. But we have education sessions on Tuesday afternoons is usually when they are, sometimes in the evenings as well. And we've done topics such as managing stress through Reiki, or we've had a financial education session. We had somebody come in and talk about financial planning and prepping for the future. So it's a wide variety of topics, but I encourage you to go on our programs and events calendar and see what are some of the education sessions we're offering, because 99.9% of them are all free and you can just join right in. One of the other methods of support that we offer is our caregiver support community, and that is a peer support group for you. We do those twice a week right now, and they're all exclusively online. We're no longer doing in-person groups right now, but on Monday mornings at 10 and on Thursday afternoons at 1, you can register for free and join a group of other caregivers to discuss some of our experiences, maybe uncover some other strategies. And often we will have some sort of learning or educational topic built into that peer discussion, that group discussion as well. The other program that we do that Jennifer mentioned is called Compass. And Compass is a program, it's a workshop that is multi-session workshop. So it's a 4-week workshop. So you have 4 different sessions you have to attend, but it essentially teaches you how you can take care of yourself and how you can empower yourself to do so. So Compass is a really valuable program that has been offered at the community for almost 15 years now. That it's been around for a long time. We just relaunched it, revamped it, the curriculum slightly, and are pushing it out and training with facilitators to offer it throughout the province. So I'll be working with Jennifer and Karen, probably both, to get some additional sessions of Compass started in your region so that you guys can participate regionally as well. But we are offering online versions of Compass at least once a month. This month we're offering 2 a month. We're having an evening session and an afternoon session. They're both full. They're already booked. They're already started and running. But we will be offering those courses every month, and we have partners who are additionally going to be offering them. The next one that does have seats open is for October 7th. It's an afternoon session from 1 p.m. to 3:30. You can register on Eventbrite. So you can go to our programs and events calendar on our webpage and do that. But this is a quote from one of the past participants who said, "I feel so much more capable of handling the unexpected by attending Compass. We go through a lot of different discussion opportunities, strategies, but Compass is about building the tools in your toolkit as a caregiver. And it's very successful in doing so, thankfully. This is a plug for our little caregiver support communities that I mentioned. We're offering those twice a week. We do offer, there's the third Thursday of the month, we offer an evening session instead of an afternoon session. So if you can't tune in during the day because of work or other responsibilities, we do offer an evening session once a month. We have another program that we're doing right now called Well Connected. I need to go on mute for just a moment and, oops. Let me do that for just a moment, if I can get my thing to pop up. Sorry, guys. Okay. Well Connected is a partner program that we are offering in partnership with Elder Care Edmonton, and it is a online day program. So if any of you had loved ones who were like attending a day program several times a week in your area, many of them have been closed since COVID, and Elder Care Edmonton was one of those, had several groups that were closed. And so we immediately jumped on board with them in April and decided to partner and pilot this opportunity to engage in day programming through Zoom, through online. And so it's been successful. It's been wildly successful. It's surprising how much fun and how much social interaction you can still get on the Zoom platform. But they have rec therapists who come in and we walk through a routine, and it's an hour-long program, and we do exercise. Sometimes we do like a little cooking discussion, and we have a recipe we share. We'll do trivia or music sing-alongs. They have dance sessions sometimes. So it's a little bit of variety of things that you might have experienced in a day program, but we're doing it online. And again, that's another free program that you can register through on Eventbrite. I want to make sure that everyone on this presentation today understands how you can reach out and get that one-on-one help. I don't think you can ever have too much support. So even if you feel like you already have good support networks, if you're struggling a little bit and you need that extra hand or that extra friendly voice to hear, or maybe uncover some additional strategies or resources, call us. You can email, whatever you're comfortable doing. But this is how you reach out and access our caregiver advisor. Our phone number there, and our emails. I'll give you just another minute to make a note of that. Having someone help us with the difference between coping and crashing. These are comments shared directly by people who've accessed our programs and services. I struggled for a long time all alone with no one to turn to. That's something another client said who's used our caregiver advisor services. I'm going to talk for a minute about some very personal resources, dementia-specific resources from my personal experience, but I need to blow my nose for a moment. So I'm going to go to take my video off and actually go on mute too, and just take a moment and do that. So I'm sorry.
It's been a really wonderful presentation so far.
Thank you.
Yeah, very informative, and I think very relatable too. There's a lot of things that you shared that I can relate to personally as a care partner myself, and also when we meet people in the community, hearing their stories as well.
Yeah, excellent, good.
Thank you.
So I just want to share these are some resources that I have been involved in helping create, and it is because I am so passionate about helping our world understand dementia better. I anticipate that I'll be living with that diagnosis someday, and so part of it selfishly is motivated by that fact, and knowing that I really, people living with dementia and family members and friends experiencing that deserve for it to be different. Like, but there's just so much more things that we could do to have a better quality of life for living with that diagnosis. And a big piece of it is just reducing the stigma and talking about it and making it okay to discuss, right? So stemming from my career in long-term care and supported living environments, I discovered that I was having a lot of the same conversations with family members and support workers around dementia, and not really understanding how to just practically approach a loved one living with this diagnosis. And so I wrote a book about it finally. It's not a very big book. It's literally maybe a fourth of an inch thick. It's a small book. It can be found on Amazon, and it's called Through the Eyes of Dementia. But it's a very practical approach to supporting someone living with this diagnosis. It goes through you know, how we need to understand the disease. It talks about how we include someone living with the disease in daily life, knowing what the needs are, what is that actual capacity, how we can communicate better, how we can offer someone living with dementia acceptance and encouraging that acceptance in ourselves. We talk about renewing a sense of control, not arguing in this book, and how to laugh it off and remain calm, because sometimes that's the most important piece. So it's a lovely little collection of my experience and the conversations and the tips that I went through with families for many, many years. So I wanted to talk about that. One of the other things I do is I do a podcast, which, if you don't know what a podcast is, it's simply like radio on demand. It's streaming radio that you don't have to tune into at a specific time. So podcasts are pre-recorded radio shows, essentially, that you can access at your leisure. And so just a little over a year ago, actually, I started this little project called the Life with Dementia podcast. And I interview people living with the diagnosis. I interview doctors and physicians, family members, really anybody that has this touch point to the dementia topic. It's an interview podcast. They're not longer than 30 minutes. And we just discuss the diagnosis and maybe what their specialty is in that area. So it's really informative. It's designed to be tangible and accessible and easily understood, because I'm a firm believer in that. So I encourage you to check that out if you're somebody who likes to listen to things and, you know, kind of get more information and more self-education. That's a good resource. And then I also partnered with a group to create a software platform called Tusk, the care navigation tool. And we're sort of, I don't want to say infancy. We're slowly moving on in the stages of this project. But it stemmed from, I have partners who have family members living with dementia and who recognize that there was a need for caregivers to be able to discover the right resources at the right time. And if there was something that maybe correlated their resources and or educational resources to certain symptoms of dementia, that would be helpful. And so we created this technology platform. It's a web-based platform called Tusk, and you can create an account and log in. And it's not a free service. It's a monthly subscription service. You can try it for a month for free and then discontinue it if you don't like it anymore. But it does two things specifically. It allows you to sort of track some of the symptoms of your loved one living with dementia. And it also helps you track how you're coping with it and how are you managing your stress around it. And then based on the answers, or based on where those tracker mechanisms are, it actually correlates to specific resources or service providers or educational material that is relevant to what you're experiencing. So I'd be remiss if I don't just share it and speak to those items that I have invested my time in creating, that I believe are helpful for people living with dementia and families and communities. So you can find out more about Tusk or Life with Dementia at thedementiaassociation.ca. We are the little group that I work with, just created a small nonprofit to specifically support these projects. And that's what we do. So looks like we're at the question time. We can come back and feel free to, did I stop sharing? I think I did. Yeah. You want to have a Q&A time, Jennifer?
Yeah, that sounds great. Just want to thank you for your time and your expertise, Jonna, and I'm sure I speak for everyone that it was an excellent presentation.
You're fading out there a minute, Jennifer. I can't hear you.
I'll speak a little closer here. I just
Yeah.
wanted to thank you for your time and your expertise, and I think I speak on behalf of everyone who's tuning in this afternoon that your presentation was very relatable, and we enjoyed it very, very much. So thank you.
You're very welcome.
You spoke on a few things that are really important to us as well, and that is the stigma. And that's part of, what we're trying to do with our education series. And next week, we are also hosting the Alzheimer's Society, and that's their whole afternoon that they're going to be talking about is the stigma that some people feel with the diagnosis of dementia.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm about to embark on a fall project within the podcast. So the Life with Dementia podcast is getting ready to include, it's me, myself, that acts as the host of the podcast that interviews people, but I'm going to include a dementia host for a special 4-part mini-series. And Roger Markle, who lives in Medicine Hat and who's a very active advocate around the dementia diagnosis, he's living with Alzheimer's disease. And so he's going to join me for a 4-part episode series through this fall, where together we are going to interview people. And so you're going to have that lived voice experience of someone living with a diagnosis, participating in the questioning and then the sort of repackaging of the information to make it accessible to us and understandable as listeners. So I'm really excited about that. I'm excited about showcasing the expertise that only lived experience has.
Yes.
And so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. So at this time, I'd like to open up any questions to any participants. If you'd like to just unmute your microphone and go ahead and ask Jonna anything that you had in mind. And also, I would encourage you to share your experience with us this afternoon, or just any comments that you had about her presentation.
I have a question, and I also really enjoyed the presentation. You did a fantastic job, and I learned quite a few things, more than what some of the stuff I've learned over the past year with Jennifer. And I also worked a little bit with recreation and long-term care, so a lot of the stuff you said was things that I used to do when working with the clients. So, and this was just a nice reminder on like little tips to do, and just working with people, the caregivers and people with dementia.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed it. I didn't get the name of the guidebook that you have. I was just wondering what the name was.
Yeah, it is called Through the Eyes of Dementia. Go back to that that view real quick, and just so we can close out showing that. So it's called Through the Eyes of Dementia. You can get it on Amazon. And am I sharing the screen again? Do you see that?
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your presentation, Jonna. We've really enjoyed it here.
Thank you, Pat.
Your information is something that I wish I'd known 20 years ago when I was taking care of my mother. I see a lot of information that I could use when I'm taking care of others as well, and not people associated with a dementia diagnosis, but just caring for others. There's information that I'm going to pass along to other people that I know as well to help them out.
Good.
Thank you.
Absolutely. It's interesting. Like, I think the strategies that we suggest for improving a life with dementia, when it really comes down to it, are strategies that benefit everyone, regardless of whether you're living with a dementia diagnosis. And I know that that's sort of the driving agenda behind the Dementia Friendly Communities Initiative too, that really supports everybody better. Any other questions or comments from anybody? All right, Jennifer, well, I guess I'll turn it over to you and let you close us
Right.
out.
Well, once again, on behalf of the Community Partners in Action Group, I want to thank you, Jana, for sharing not only your lived experience, but your expertise and all the additional resources that are available for individuals and community members. So on behalf of the Community Partners in Action Group, thank you for supporting our dementia-friendly community initiative. And I'm sure many of us will be looking at the three specific resources from your personal experience that you shared with us today.
Thank you. Yep. All right, well, everyone have a wonderful afternoon. I'm off to take some more sinus decongestant medication.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your time with us and for the contribution that you all have been making with joining us every afternoon to making Innisfail a more dementia-friendly community to live in. So thank you, everybody. Thanks.